Welcome back, everyone, to episode 2 of the mental health edition of the Detroit Lions podcast. I am Jeff Widenhofer, your host, and walking you through this. I am a licensed mental health professional. I've been a Detroit Lions fan since I was a teenager in the early 90s. Today, I work for the federal government as a psychotherapist, a mental health counselor. Everything I say here is my own opinion. It does not reflect the policies or viewpoints of any federal department or government agency. If you listened to episode 1, you know I talked about how everything is different, right? And if you're wondering what the hell is going on with this mental health edition, who is this fucking guy? The answer is nobody special. I'm just a big Lions fan and I work in mental health and I see many interesting things happening to our fan base since this team has turned it around. So if you're curious about what I'm doing, why I'm doing this, I do encourage you to listen to that first episode. I spent quite a bit of time explaining the series, why I think it's interesting and possibly useful to us Lions fans. And I did some discussion on reflecting, change and adapting, and I spent some time on the concept of negativity bias in that episode. Okay, this episode, I am actually going to talk about change in the Lions organization. Some ways that the team, the organization has changed. I like psychology. I think psychotherapy, therapy and counseling is awesome and inspiring and beautiful, really, really amazing stuff when it reveals things that change our lives in good ways. When shit gets better, right? The phrase mental health, though, is interesting because it contains the word mental. It's not emotional health. That's not what we say, even though that is a huge part of our mental health and what neuroscientists understand, but a lot of areas of our culture do not, including the military, right, where I come from, is that our mental experiences, the things that are processed in our minds, our brains, our mentals, it is both cognitive, intellectual thoughts and emotional. We humans, particularly kind of in the West, have set out on this path, and it's been happening for a long time, of considering our brains as our thinking devices. That's where, that's where we figure stuff up and we solve our problems. And in fact, it is that. It is also our sensing, our feeling, our emotional, and our responding device. That's what our brains are doing, right? For example, there's parts of our brains that activate when the feeling of love and intimacy is experienced, right? And certain chemicals are released. The same is true when we humans experience spirituality and awe. The same is true when we experience anger or defensive aggression. Got to stand up for ourselves, fight back. And I'm going to get into that, I think, next episode. Everything you experience happens in and through your brain. If you stub your toe, right? Say you stub your toe. We've all done it. We know how we react. We know how it feels. If we didn't have nerves connecting our toe to our brains, and if we didn't have those areas of the brain that sense and respond to pain, we would not know that it hurts. In fact, it wouldn't hurt. Pain would not exist. Okay? Similarly, I read somewhere that the part of the brain that experiences and responds to pain, that region is where both physical and emotional pain are processed. But it's easy for us in our culture, modern culture in the West, to write that side off. Right? They say that? To write, W-R-I-T-E, that side off. Especially those of us who are emotionally avoidant or dismissive. But of course, emotional pain is real, right? I'm going to get serious here for a second. Ever been to a funeral for a loved one? Ever get dumped? Ever see a loved one get sick? Hurt? That shit is real. It hurts. It's visceral. It's in our cells. It's not just, it's down in our heart. That's where we love and that's where we feel our pain in our heart. That's a nice metaphor. It's been a nice metaphor for a long time. But the heart fucking pumps blood, okay? The heart doesn't pump emotions. All that stuff is up here in the brains. Okay. So to write off this aspect of us as emotional beings, it's kind of disingenuous. But that's what we modern people have tended to do. And, if you are uncomfortable with this or any part of this discussion, the emotional side, well, I'll tell you what, that's evidence that it's real, that you are an emotional being because you feel that discomfort. Okay. And, if you don't feel and live with your emotions, believe me, this is going to relate to Lions fans, our experiences in a moment here. But if you don't feel and live with your emotions, well, either you're a robot or you might be considered by some literature written by the American Psychiatric Association as psychotic, a psychopath, a sociopath. I'm being very serious here, right? When we humans don't respond to the feelings inside of us, we don't respond to others in our culture, in our society, social settings, right? When we don't act what is considered normal, healthy human behavior, we use words like psychotic or sociopath, right? So I got kind of real there for a second, but I do want to remind you, like I did last episode, there is a separation here between serious mental health work and our experiences as sports fans. Okay. But you see, again, in the language I use, there's similarities: suffering, pain, depressed feelings, anxiousness, impulsiveness, overreactions. And I do want to recognize none of you are robots. You do have an emotional side to you. It's just as real and alive and important to your health as your intellect. Our brains are not just thinking machines, okay? And I wanted to bring all that up because I want to preface this next discussion with that acknowledgement that we are intellectual and emotional beings. We're also physical and spiritual and sexual beings. Don't worry, I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to get into that stuff. But I want to break through some stigmas and barriers and just knock some of that shit down that many of us, dudes in particular, but also women, the stigmas and the barriers many of us have around these topics. We are emotional beings. To act like we're not is insincere, disingenuous, okay? And I want to talk about some of the ways that the Lions organization has changed with a recognition that their emotional worlds are at play. I'm going to talk about leadership and culture next. You might ask the question, why is this mental health dude lecturing about leadership and culture? Hopefully I am not lecturing. Rather, raising some interesting points and processing through some discussion points, okay? And as far as being an expert, I propose that we all are. If you've ever worked for someone or worked under someone, had a boss or employees or family members that you're responsible for or felt responsible for, either their performance or also their well-being, right? If you've ever lived in a community, if you've ever influenced another person or been influenced, then you could be considered an expert on those aspects of your life. But so I talked about my military experience a little bit in that first episode. I'll just review it quickly. I was a Navy officer for 20 years. 9 of that was active duty as a helicopter pilot, deploying to the Middle East, and 11 years as a reserve officer. I did 4 total deployments to the Middle East. And along the way, I worked at some major commands, which means there's like hundreds of people there. I also worked in some very small units. When we did flight operations over water, anytime you're over water and doing usually any type of serious mission, you're going to have a crew of 4. And when I first started out, I was one of the junior people, right? I'm not in charge of anything. But at the end there, I was the pilot in command. So like many of you, I have experienced working for people and having people work under my influence, where I was responsible for their performance and their well-being to an extent. I say that because I want you to know where I'm coming from. All right, so let's talk leadership and culture in the Lions organization. First, let's look where we have been. Bob Quinn, Martin Mayhew, Matt Millen. All those drafts, free agent signings, defensive backs, running backs, offensive linemen, defensive linemen, tight ends, wide receivers. And when I first started to prepare this, I wanted to name a bunch of players over the years that we drafted that didn't pan out, because I thought that might be a fun trip down memory lane, some laughs, might feel cathartic. But then I decided against it. I'm not going to do that. Not right here. And there's all kinds of reasons why people don't become a superstar in their profession, right? And I kind of don't want to add more negativity there. I also don't want to alienate any person, former players, if they are still in our Lions community. Okay. Coaches, on the other hand, I'm okay with talking more about, right? I'm more comfortable in this medium talking about what I and many of you saw happening and not happening. Okay. So who did we have there? Just going back to Jim Schwartz. If you remember when he took over 2009, all that toughness, attitude, but maybe wasn't real high on the humility side of it. Okay. I don't think I'm saying anything revolutionary there. Anybody remember the Jim Harbaugh handshake? World's angriest handshake. Did they even shake hands? It was such a weird thing. Then we had Jim Caldwell. Man, guy had such great relationships with players, tons of humility, right? Given respect all around, had all that evenness and stability. But what we fans, at least, and I'll just say that, this is what we fans never saw, was the rage or passion come out of that guy that helps men rise up and fight back in a sports league full of dramatic emotional shifts. We just didn't see it. It was just so even and so calm, right? And then the next guy, Matt Patricia, I don't even know where to start with that dude. A lot was lacking. I think if you were paying attention, you saw it. We don't even need to explain it necessarily right now. We probably have over and over and over again. So now we're going to talk about Dan Campbell's first press conference. Great. I don't need to repeat the taglines. We don't need to revisit all the kind of weirdness around it and all the reactions and all these things. But I want to talk about what I thought, especially after a couple of years of seeing him work, what I think he was really saying in that first press conference. You all remember it 3.5 years ago, right? His messaging, not his words necessarily, but his messaging and the purpose behind it. Because I had a sense he was being very direct towards a certain group of people, and that was it. That's all he cared about. Certain people, the only people who could help him get this team to succeed. That's number one, players, his coaches, probably employees, and us fans. And that's it. I don't think he was talking to anyone outside of that. Okay. And I do think he was addressing us and including us fans with the players and coaches and employees in the Lions organization. Okay. Because you got to have some guts to say those phrases. And he knew, just like we all did on some level, that the clueless national media members, this is all they're going to hear is some of those taglines. I do believe he knew that because we knew it, right? And it's because it's not what people are used to hearing, right? So many coaches, think back 3 years ago, it was Mike McDaniels coming on board and Sean McVay, he's like the smartest guy in the whole NFL. And that's what a coach should be. And the guy up in Green Bay is very smart, right? There was this kind of movement toward, if you were an intellectual coach, man, that's the really exciting thing. That's what you want to be. But here's what many national media members missed on. And I use the word clueless. I probably shouldn't use that. It's a little judgmental, maybe ignorant, because they weren't really paying attention. So they weren't really learning what was going on there. Dan Campbell was not trying to impress anyone. He was not trying to be a media darling, nor was he trying to assume the role of the intellectual coach, the guy who calls all the plays and has all the designs in his head, which was kind of the going thing back then. He was not pandering to the crowd that loves that type of coach. Rather, Dan Campbell was trying to stir something up in certain people, the people that mattered to him, the people that he cares about, the only people that could really help him be successful. If you don't think it was calculated to stir something deeper than just dumb energy, yeah, let's all go run through a wall for no reason. If you think it was just some meathead riffing, I think you really missed the point, the context. I think he was trying to stir up something in the only people who can help make this team successful, the players, coaches, employees, and yes, us fans. We do have a limited impact on the success of this franchise. Look at what Ford Field was before. Look at the booing. Not every seat's filled. People leaving fourth quarter. Frustrated, showing up there with some hope and some passion. Let's get going. Let's get this game going by the second quarter, maybe the third, maybe the fourth quarter, right? Look what Ford Field is now. Oh my God. I would love to go to a home game. I can't see that happening this year on my schedule, but oh my God, that would be an awesome experience. And I do think he was stirring up in all of us the passion that lives in us, but also, trying to get us to then use that passion for resolve to change. I think he knew exactly how those words and those taglines would land with us because he knew we were starving for change. Okay? And I do think that was the first big leadership move he took. And I fucking love it, man. Even if some distant, ignorant ivory tower national pundits couldn't understand it or still can't understand it or connect with it. And that's okay. Next, I want to talk about emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence. And I particularly want to talk about the emotional intelligence of Dan Campbell. What is emotional intelligence? Because remember, our brains are not just thinking and calculating and problem solving machines. We also experience life. All right. One definition that I grabbed off of the internet of emotional intelligence, it's kind of long, but stick with me. There's a lot of parts to it because it's really abstract. Emotional intelligence, the ability to understand, use, and manage our emotions in positive ways to do some things. We can relieve stress, communicate effectively, empathize with others, and overcome challenges and diffuse conflict. That's one definition of emotional intelligence. Remember, mental health is your entire self. It is all sides and aspects and angles of you here, okay? And, unlike when we are emotionally avoidant or dismissive, I'm just angry. I'm going to pause right there too, right? When we're emotionally avoidant and dismissive and we say we're angry, I'll go get into mental health a little bit here. In my sessions, I learned this early on. I saw this in a video. A woman was doing this and she was talking about, I think, proud people, men in particular, and how do you get through to them? How do you get to them to just let their guard down a little bit? And she asked the question, does that hurt your feelings? I have learned to use that question hopefully thoughtfully and hopefully effectively at times. I also know sometimes when I'm meeting with people, I can ask it too early because the answer is nope. No, it just made me angry. Once we see and have the emotional talents to see what's going on, right, to understand and manage our emotions in positive ways, maybe we can admit, yeah, that hurt my feelings. And believe me, that is a hard thing for me to say. Okay. I'd rather just say I'm angry, because if I'm angry, well, then I'm being tough. Okay, going a little too far off. But when we're emotionally avoidant and dismissive, we are not being emotionally intelligent. We are not understanding, using, managing our emotions in positive ways. Emotional intelligence requires honesty. And to be honest, you kind of have to be curious. That can lead to insight. Right? I talked about that last episode. So emotional intelligence, the ability to, I'll say this, I'll call it identify and face feelings that come up, as opposed to denying, avoiding, repressing, or deflecting them, right? And often happens in impulsive manners. Emotional intelligence can shape our experiences so we can pursue a goal through the course of difficult emotions. Okay. What kind of difficult emotions might football players and NFL fans feel? Disappointment, frustration. Okay. Worry, concern, anxiety, fear, doubt. The players certainly feel pain, the emotion around that, weariness, injury, ouch, in addition to their disappointment, frustration, worry, doubt, maybe guilt too, right? Imagine that quarterback gives a touchdown up. Quarterback throws an interception. God dang it, I just gave away that whole drive, right? You got to work through those things to get to the next part. You could say this is resilience and grit. There's a lot of overlap here. The ability to work through pain, physical and emotional, disappointment, failure, doubt, weariness, negative cognitions, thoughts, and keep focused on a goal to do something good to follow what we want. So in a lot of cases, people who have high levels of emotional intelligence are not afraid to feel the negative stuff. Okay. This concept is so important in my work. And I'm going to get back to therapy counseling here a little bit. Working through our emotional pain and discomfort can really be part of a beautiful healing process for a lot of people. Okay. Sometimes our responses to pain and discomfort becomes so impulsive that new sets of problems arise: lashing out, isolation, aggression, severe depression. Okay. In therapy, what helps a lot of people, and we do this in our lives too. Therapy is just an extension of some good processes that happen in the real world. What helps a lot of us get to the good stuff in our lives, what helps start the healing process, is some psychoeducation, learning what's really going on inside of us, right? That's one reason why I think psychology is so cool. But psychology is theoretical, right? It's backed up by research and studies. We also use neuroscience now, which is more fact-based. That can be used, psychology and neuroscience can be used in partnership to highlight some of the things that are happening when we have trouble enduring our pain, when the symptoms of our pain become problematic. We call that dysfunction. Psychoeducation is useful because it can help us hold less stress, tension, and negative feelings around our difficult experiences. The experience of disappointment and guilt and doubt and fear and loneliness and grief, man, that stuff is bad enough. But when we're now holding stress and tension on top of it to hold it down or push it away, avoid it, repress it, deflect it, we are compounding. And that's a lot of times what we're talking about when we talk about symptoms, mental health symptoms of disorders. Okay. When we learn what's going on in us, when we can see it, be honest, have curiosity about it, then we can learn to be less judgmental. Okay. And in my work, when people learn that PTSD, post-traumatic stress, stress that happens long after a traumatic event, the disorder of that, it's really about portions of our brain that are working exactly the way they're supposed to work. That's really what's going on. Suddenly, some of the negative feelings, right? The loss of self-esteem, self-compassion, some of that stuff starts to erode and the good stuff starts to come in. Oh, maybe I'm not different from everyone else. Maybe I shouldn't hide away from the world. I don't have to. Okay. And learning what's going on inside of us so we can serve ourselves better. And I see lots of emotional intelligence in Dan Campbell. I see a high degree of it. I'm sure some of you do too. I've heard Chris talk about this. Okay. I do know that there's still some debate going on about the fourth down conversion dilemma, going for it on fourth down instead of kicking a field goal or punting. I've heard national writers claim that Dan Campbell does not possess enough good decision-making and logic and emotional intelligence, that he's overcome by his emotions, and that's why he keeps going it. And it could be true, but I also see some other things, okay? I cannot resolve that debate. I never sat with the man, probably never will. I do have reason to believe that he is a man who works through his emotions, to make good decisions. We can point to his understanding of the field goal kickers on the team. He knows their statistics, what they're good for, and what their probabilities are around, different distances from the goalpost. He also knows the prowess of his offensive line, his running backs. He's aware of what they're able to do. He's also probably in touch with the emotions of the game and the momentum shifts that are going on and the value of momentum and momentum shifts. The value of having his team ride or receive an emotional wave, right? Football is very emotional. It has to be if you're going to do well at it because it requires so much effort. I actually wonder with Dan Campbell if he has studied and reflected on the value and the statistics of riding emotional waves. That's not something I've ever heard a national writer talk about. I've heard them talk about the benefits. Well, if you kick the field goal right here, you'll make it, and therefore you should kick it. That's not always true. There's also value in riding momentum and creating momentum that follow a successful fourth down conversion, right? But I don't know. So let's keep observing. Let's keep discussing. Let's keep evaluating. Aside from the fourth down of debate, I see this man having depths of emotional intelligence, and I'll talk about some areas where I see that next. I'm going to talk about some things I see in the culture of the Detroit Lions organization. Okay, culture of humility, respect, and empowerment. There's something I see in Dan Campbell and the whole organization. That's Sheila Ford-Hamp, Brad Holmes, Chris Spielman, Mark Brunell, Antoine Randall L, Aaron Glenn, and Kelvin Shepard, all these people, right, that they are instilling. I see them instilling and exhibiting humility, respect, and empowerment. And I believe these things go hand in hand, right? You have to have humility to respect someone, to really respect them as a person, right? And when a person receives respect, we often feel then empowered. Dan Campbell works with professional athletes, people in their 20s and 30s who are no longer being raised. He works with adults, and I see him challenging his players to be even more mature and I see him giving them the space to be even more resilient, right? Empowering them. And he has an expectation too. You find the motivation to work in the off season. You need to have a reason to compete with that guy across from you every single play. You find the resilience and grit to bounce back after a tough play, series, or loss, right? He's not holding their hand. He is not pushing them, coddling them, nor is he scaring them into being something they're not. And I think this is key because I've heard on so many different national podcasts, so many times that people think Dan Campbell is a motivator. He's a screamer. And they label him as such, and they kind of leave it there. And it's like, well, of course, to some degree, because he's a football coach. If you've ever been around the sport, everybody has to be up the whole time. But what I do not see him doing is holding people's hand, right, and coddling them and scaring them into being something or not, lighting fires under asses. Do you see Dan and Aaron Glenn and Ben Johnson go around all game long yelling and frightening their players to behave a certain way? Is it their task to light fires under asses? I don't see it. Sometimes, yes, because it's football. It's a very physical, emotional sport. But for the most part, I believe what I see is they bring in players who can already engage, access that inner motivation, competitive drive, desire to improve. And we see them speak to these players in respectful, empowering ways. We saw it all through Hard Knocks now 2 years ago. We see it in all the interviews, right? Coach Dan Campbell, we'll start with him, speaks with humility because they cannot babysit these guys like you would, a freshman, sophomore high school football team. You would literally have to teach them to get up, to be ready for a play. And I think they just can't spend every moment of training camp and in-season practice and all game long reminding players that football requires success and energy and emotion. I get a little annoyed when I hear people lump coaches into one category or another, and then they leave the discussion at that. I heard it on a Ringer podcast recently. They think Dan Campbell is one of the, I forget what they called it, but essentially a screamer, a motivator. Maybe in his first season, he really was. Maybe because he had to be, because he needed a lot more help. The roster was not ready. It certainly wasn't what it was today. On the second season, when they did Hard Knocks, maybe more so here and there. But really, how much does Amon-Ra St. Brown need someone to motivate him? Jared Goff, Hutch, Alex Anzalone, Brian Branch, DJ Reader, Penei Sewell, Frank Ragnow, Jack Campbell, Sam Laporta. Do these guys need to be motivated? Do they need a screamer? What I see, and I'm sure many of you see, the type of player the front office has overwhelmingly been picking and contracting is someone who does this innately. Maybe not every single player, There's an argument that Jameson Williams needed some of this, or at least he needed to figure this stuff out on his own to a greater degree. Yep, got it. One guy. For the most part, though, the rest overwhelmingly do not need someone to motivate them, to scream at them. And it's cool. It's really awesome to see all this work that the coaching staff is doing, the empowering, which I'll speak more to in a minute here, has come to fruition, right? Fighting back in so many games. It's a reason why they went in the 2022 season. They went 8-2 after 1-6, right? And then this past year, they went 14-6. This team's on a 22-8 run. That's a 73% winning percentage after starting out 4-19, a 17% winning percentage. One of the only sure things in an NFL game is that the other team will push back. There will be changes in momentum. There will be pain and disappointment. There will be failed plays. There will be weariness, right? So now getting into Brad Holmes and continuing on this theme of resilience culture. How do you build a roster full of resilient, tough, disciplined, focused, emotionally intelligent, right? Focusing through their difficult emotions. Those types of players. How do you find them? First off, we don't know. We're not behind the scenes. I'm not. I wish I knew. It would be really fun to see it. But their whole scouting process and what they value and what they do. I wonder sometimes in their scouting process if they have an emphasis on looking deeper than the immediate objective success, right? So strength and speed and straight line 40 time and technique and shuttle time. And look at the statistics, interceptions and pressures. And then of course they look at that stuff, but I wonder if they're also looking deeper into character. They talk about football character a lot. And I wonder if one measure of that is what happens to these players. What are these players doing that they're looking at after things go negative, after they were beat on a play, after a bad series, after an interception, after giving up a touchdown, after a bad quarter, a bad half, a bad game, a bad series of games. I wonder if Brad Holmes is like looking at that too, if there's some kind of metric or measurable for that. I don't know. I think it'd be something interesting to look at though. And I think, oh my God, it's so stupid when Chris talks about these people, certain local newspapers in Detroit publish articles like, I'm not going to state what the article said exactly, but the Lions might not end up selecting talented players if they just focus on grit. Oh my God, come on, dude. Like that might be true if Brad Holmes and company could not spot the tangible stuff, right? Speed, length, quickness, statistics, give me a break. But shocker, they can also do that, right? So I don't think we've seen our Detroit Lions exhibit these qualities, resilience and grit, this pervasively ever. Not this much. I don't think we've ever seen a coaching staff with this much emotional intelligence. And the cool thing is now in that organization, there is corporate pressure and peer pressure to exhibit resilience and grit, because you're going to stand out if you are not exhibiting those things, right? Think back a little bit. Did Matt Patricia, was he fostering it? Bob Quinn, Martin Mayhew? Probably they were talking about these qualities sometimes, but were they really, really prioritizing it and exhibiting it themselves? Ooh, that's a tough question for Matt Patricia, right? Humility, respect, empowerment. insight into a player's innate resilience. Was that the focus for those other people? Not this much. Certainly not this much. And throughout the military, I've met people who are like this all over the place, from young helicopter air crewmen to fighter pilots and Marines and all kinds of different people. But one group I want to talk about just briefly here that has in its fabric, the fabric of its culture, these qualities of being resilient, inner motivation, and just being able to draw it out yourself to compete and to keep going through difficult circumstances is Navy Special Warfare. Anyone who has known a Navy SEAL knows that you don't have to motivate them, right? Whether it's working out or building something, coordinating something, because maybe we need a favor, a friend of yours is a SEAL and you're like, hey man, I need help getting dinner for my kids tonight because my wife is still in the hospital after that minor surgery and I have to take the oldest kid to a dance recital. Can you help? Whether it's that or, hey, we got to send a rescue team over that mountain range because a helicopter had to make an emergency landing. And by the way, it's really cold. It's rugged. It's raining right now. Oh, and by the way, we don't have any cold weather gear with us to give you, right? Can you help? What we have to do to work through our concerns and fears and pains to get things done, man, that says a lot about our resilience and our grit. And that's who we have in these Detroit Lions. It's strange to think that other NFL organizations don't have this as much, but some don't. Maybe because not every front office makes it a primary focus. Maybe not every staff has the emotional intelligence to identify it and exhibit it in themselves and therefore empower it in the entire organization. We Lions fans are so lucky to finally have this. And Brad Holmes has equipped Dan Campbell with players who get that for the most part on the day they arrive. Why does this matter? Why is it good for us Lions fans to be aware of this? Maybe because we've been burned so many goddamn times by this Lions team that could not come back from a failed play or an unsuccessful drive or a disappointing quarter or a bad interception. It's one reason why so many of us gave up on them and disconnected so many times. If you were around 16 years ago following this team, do you remember the first play of the 0-16 season? I do. I remember I was living in New York City. I was at a Mets game watching it on my phone, just following the play-by-play. It was versus the Falcons. They had a rookie quarterback, Matt Ryan. His first NFL game ever. Just a young kid, Matt Ryan. His first throw in the first quarter, in the first series of his NFL career against the Lions, he threw it for a touchdown. And it wasn't, I'm not talking like a 5-yard slant. I'm talking it was like across the whole field touchdown. That Lions team ended up going 0-16. Jeez, I mean, there's a lot of reasons for that. But man, talk about resilience today and what we're lucky to see, okay? And so the question arises for us fans, what do we want out of our favorite sports franchise, the Lions? What do we expect? What are we looking for? Do we expect them to win every game, beat every division opponent, dominate every possession, win every play, never miss on a draft pick, never screw up a call, a timeout, ever? Because we know one sure thing in the NFL, the other team will push back, right? The margin for error and the equality between teams it's really tight. These games, give me a break. A couple of plays, if that NFC Championship game, if who number 8 would have caught another one of those late down passes. If Jahmyr Gibbs didn't give up the ball, right? If a ball didn't bounce off a dude's freaking helmet and then he makes some diving acrobatic once in a lifetime catch. If one or two of those things went differently, we probably would have had a Super Bowl to enjoy. I want to just mention one guy, Jalen Carter, in last year's draft. There is a reason why he's not on this team. When you look at the players on the Lions and the players in the draft, look a little deeper. Look at emotional intelligence. Look at how they persevere. Look at how they are motivated on their own. I know we're not face to face with these dudes. It'd be fun if we were, but But just look for people who discuss those things. And when you look at the coaches, that their humility, the respect they give, and the empowerment they give these players, right? Remember what happened. I know I'm going long here. Remember what happened after the Cowboys game. I'm not talking about the refs screwing it up with Dan Skipper's call, right? I'm talking about the next morning. Do you remember what the news said? It was a bad loss. It sucked. Bad taste in the mouth. Really not cool. This is one of the better teams they're playing, and they couldn't beat them, right? That stung. The next morning, I saw an article early in the morning that said Dan Campbell had a bunch of stuff delivered to his home, or a bunch of contractors came out middle of the night, affected his family the night after a bad loss. I remember seeing that headline. It was like, oh God, that's awful. He's going to have a tough time focusing this week, But remember, he came up into that conference on that Monday, and he was like, we are moving forward, and he's like, he said, I don't go the other way. People, when he said that, it affected me. I saw it. I said, oh shit, we're back in business, And I asked myself, how would I have dealt with that if they did it to my personal life? I would have been pissy. I would have been grumpy. I would have been short. I would not have as much humility. Probably would not be given as much respect to my people too. I'd be mad, right? I love this team. And sometimes this team makes me look at my own life. I think it's inspiring, right? Not every single thing, but some of these things this Lions organization is doing, it's just awesome stuff. So I asked myself the question, how do I respond to stress and disappointment? What is my identity? Am I emotionally intelligent enough to keep moving toward a goal, some shit that I want in my life? When I feel a bunch of negativity or disappointment or doubt or guilt, this is good stuff, you guys, men and women, girls and guys. This is some honest, vulnerable, visceral, emotionally intelligent stuff happening here in our favorite football team. Our Detroit Lions are giving it to us, but they have not always been this way. They were not that way when Dan Campbell showed up. And that's one reason why he said, we've had enough of that shit, right? Let's go Lions.